welcome to today's webinar brought to you by Coveo and MC+A, the time to upgrade your enterprise search solution to an insight engine. Thank you for joining the call today. We will just do a little bit of logistics. We'll be taking questions through the question panel, so feel free to put your questions in on the right-hand side, and we'll get to those during the course of the event. And we will be recording this, so expect to receive a link to the recording and a follow-up after the event. And equally, feel free to forward that on to your friends and colleagues for those that weren't able to make it today. By way of introduction, this is a joint presentation between myself, Mark Floysand, I'm CMO of Coveo, and my co-host, Michael Sismar, who is President and Managing Director of MC+A. We're going to cover a couple of things today, and in terms of what we hope to get through in what should be a pretty packed agenda is, first and foremost, what is an insight engine? What is it? And perhaps more importantly, how does it impact your business? Some of the key considerations to think about, and what is going on in the marketplace. MC+A have several customers who have deployed various implementations, and so really getting an observation of what's actually going on. We'll talk a little bit about the GSA cliff, the Google Search Appliance cliff, and whether that affects you or not. Then perhaps lead on to why Coveo and what you might want to consider doing next. So without any further ado, let's leap into the agenda and we'll get cracking. So first and foremost, what is an insight engine? So a formal definition perhaps from our friends over at Gartner. Gartner describes an insight engine as something that applies relevancy methods to describe, discover, organize, or analyze data. And that's great. Really what it's doing is taking advantage of being able to pull together a lot of disparate information and synthesize or pull it together to provide information kind of proactively or interactively to the people who need to interact with it in the context of what they're doing. So whether they're office workers, whether they're customers on a website, or various constituents at the timely business moments that matter. So this is Gartner's definition, and obviously we're pretty pleased with the placement of Coveo, as you can see up on the top right there, really as recognition of how that works. Michael, how does this correlate with your view of an insight engine? Where do you guys sort of see that playing out?
I mean, we were very pleased in the fact that Gartner had actually deprecated the enterprise search Magic Quadrant, because we felt that was somewhat a dated view of the marketplace and people's expectations. And I think the transformation into insight engines and search and assist technology is fairly accurately defined here. I think there are at least half a dozen derivative use cases that come from that notion of insight and assist. And I think that definitely in this report, you're clearly standing out well ahead, and we'll kind of talk with about some of those reasons for that in a few moments.
Sure. Yeah, and you're absolutely right, and it's nice to see the placement. But as you said, the market itself has moved, which is perhaps what this is more a reflection of, the fact that customers are looking for more than your grandfather's search, and so really this is this is where we're seeing the analysts really reflecting what they're hearing from their own IT clients. And actually, interesting enough, another report just came out, in fact, this morning, from Forrester. And so, folks that are on the call, you're seeing this fresh. But Forrester has some parallels. This is actually their cognitive search and knowledge discovery solutions report. And again, we're pleased to be, extreme right in terms of strategy. And in the leader part of the wave there as well, ahead of our friends over at IBM, which is always nice. But again, you look at the quotes. So this is Forrester's term: search is about finding answers, context, and documents, but adding useful context to apps and augmenting human intelligence. Most important requirements are the relevancy and completeness of those returned results. So, Michael, looks like Forrester are kind of in agreement with Gartner on this direction.
I absolutely agree. I mean, we had heard about the report coming out sometimes, and it's nice to have a second view. And Coveo's and some of the others are positioned very similarly. So it's kind of a validation on both of those. They're done independently, and again, it's reinforcing the shift in the marketplace. Some of the ways that they're describing it is how we've described it, for some time, and through our partnership together, a lot of times, whether I'm talking to Louis, whether I'm talking to you, whoever I'm talking to the organization, we use a lot of the same language, context, relevancy. It's moving beyond the keywords. We had I was on a pitch a week or so ago, and someone in the room was like, "You guys aren't just going to show us a list, are you?" I was like, "No, we're not. We're totally in tune with what you're thinking out there." But I think that this is definitely the market's reaction to the shift.
Yeah, and you know what? So if we think of relevance, perhaps one of the reasons that we're pleased to see it obviously reflected by the analysts themselves in their definitions of this space is that we see relevance having an impact on business in many, many different ways. And you can kind of contrast quite starkly, where you're not providing the most relevant information in a buyer's journey or to employees in their day-to-day tasks. Bad stuff happens. And whether that's around customers not converting, whether that's around satisfaction going on the decline, whether, cross-sells don't work, or indeed, just people not being able to find the most relevant information, they end up just kind of repetitively looking for the same stuff, which is just debilitating from a morale point of view. All of these things are the negative impacts of it. The flip side of that is that, the inverse is true. So, in a world where more relevant information is put in the hands of people in the context of what they're trying to do, they're able to do more by themselves. If we think from a contact center point of view, agents can take on more and take on more difficult tasks because they're equipped with a lot more supporting information to help them at the moment that they need it. People are able to assimilate more things, work on more complex projects. The whole notion of customers being able to find what they want on their own because they're being presented with the most relevant information and context. All of these things come to bear. And so where we kind of summarize that perhaps is if you think of relevance as being affecting businesses in kind of two broad categories. Let's think of those places where there are external facing opportunities to engage with customers. Call that intelligent engagement if you like, but it manifests itself in providing, relevant information for individuals on things like, personalized websites or customer self-service sites or, channel portals. Maybe you have a dealer network or a partner network or a retailer network of if you're in distribution. Where do they go to help themselves and find information that's specific to them, external to your company? And then the flip side of that, of course, is on the internal-facing things. Let's call those intelligent workplaces. How do we help the staff in your organizations through improving the sort of information that may live or be provided in a CRM system, maybe the knowledge centers they have in a contact center, employee portals, and so on. Michael, do you see this sort of bearing out in the clients you're doing business with?
Very much so. I mean, these are the exact use cases that people come to us for implementation. It's about assisting a journey, assisting a workflow, and kind of how you've got these segmented is the persona of that person who is initiating that workflow. And it's, just a point I was going to make is that often people come to us and say, or when we speak to them, there's this notion of functional relevance. Right? I typed in a keyword and I got that result list back, and check, done. And that is kind of obviously not the way that we think about it, because it all has to be cycled into outcomes and measurement. So the true measurement of relevancy isn't that you get back results, but that you are getting, that you are affecting the outcome for the purpose of the workflow. Those workflows here are, e-commerce journeys, the buyer journey on a website, the partner that you're supporting, potentially in a region across the world in a different language. They use different nomenclature for the products that you sell to them or that they're supporting. And so these are the things that we're looking to address with Insight Engines.
Cool. Let's pick on another quote from our friends over at Forrester. A while ago now, 2 years back, it feels like a lifetime, they talked about relevance being the currency of the digital age. And, again, I think what we're seeing is that for digital experiences for, customers, partners, or employees to be meaningful, they have to be relevant throughout that journey, as you say. It's that notion of how is the sequence of information becoming increasingly specific and increasingly pertinent to each individual, so that the recommendations they have throughout their journey are more and more specific to them. And our thesis on this is obviously that this stuff is fundamentally powered by the kind of search technologies and AI and machine learning under the hood that helps automate this stuff at a scale that just isn't manageable by hand. Now, I know, Michael, you've thought about a couple of key considerations for, your clients. So maybe if I can, let's dwell on each of those in turn. I think one of the things you talk about is user intent. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first and foremost, what our goal in implementing a solution that addresses one of these workflows is to look at how we can understand the user's intent. Intent, as I said before, isn't simply what keywords do they put in, but what's their navigation path? Where are they located geographically? This goes beyond just tokenization and field mapping, but looking at how to address those service requests. And what we say is that, kind of here on the slide, is data is growing on a massive scale. The resources that you need aren't. If you're trying to address this with a typical field or relevancy scoring algorithm with a team, it just doesn't keep up. We do go out of the gate with those type of models because we don't have the clickstream analysis to start to build to them, but it is something that we definitely today rely more and more on machine learning to detect those little patterns that give insight into the intent.
Got it. And then, you talk about user outcomes. What does that mean?
So this is the couple of intent. So trying to understand the intent and then affect an outcome. So if someone's coming to your website to purchase a product, if they're coming to your website to find information, we look at what the outcome is, and we kind of go backwards from that. Like what is the purpose of the project or the system that we're looking to implement? Are we measuring it? And is what we're doing positively affecting the outcomes that we're looking for? So, is it a case deflection? So, are we able to self-service that individual so that they don't create a case, thereby reducing costs and overhead? But the whole purpose of a insight engine is to provide insights that affect the outcomes. That's the holy grail of the ROI.
Got it. And I guess the key thing with an outcome is, ensuring that it is contextually relevant, right?
Exactly. So if it's not, there's whether it's a machine learning algorithm like Coveo ML, where it's learning to rank or something else. You want to position over time to have more successful outcomes.
Right. You talk about this notion of presenting stuff in the context of need. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, and we historically did a lot of work with Google, and Google is known for having a great search algorithm and this technology called the Google Search Appliance, and people would come and say, I'm on search.mycompany.com. And after we implemented, we did everything, we would look back and see where, how effective the solution was. And we found that if people had to kind of opt in to the technology, meaning that they would have to, if I'm working on a case, that if I had to go to that website to perform search and come back to the case, that had a little bit of friction, and there was less adoption. So what we want to do, kind of learning from that, is to say that we want to inject search into your workflow. So if you're working on, caseworkers work a little bit differently. A lot of times they'll grab cases from a queue and work similar cases, similar products at the same time. Rather than, so that you have to game the system so that it's to their advantage, or optimize it so that it works through that workflow. Additionally, if you can put a search box, or if you can surface relevant articles, knowledge articles to a particular case based on the product, based on the problem summary, you are shortening that cycle. And that's what we mean with context. So injecting it into that journey and the workflow is the most effective implementation of search.
Got it. And yeah, I love this notion of signals matter. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, there's what we're doing is we're doing signals processing. So with clickstream analysis, and with understanding the journey that people come to, we just kind of coined this probably a year ago. But this goes back to, it's beyond keywords, right? The notion that, hey, I've implemented a search index, check, I'm done. It's not going to meet the needs in the future. There has to be, coupled to that, learning to rank, which is kind of a broad term, which means that the system, based on its usage, based on user personas, based on profiles, tunes itself to the positive outcomes that it detects. What are people clicking on? Are they navigating? Are they doing autocomplete? Which autocompletes are more successful? What do articles that people who exhibit this pattern look like? And when you kind of go into Coveo, a company can go and build a technology and learn to do this on their own. But you guys have done a lot of work in developing those algorithms so that they're ready to run. And it's simply a matter of bringing the data points in to let the algorithm spin on it, so that they're benefiting from the fact that you guys have all the data from all the customers and all your experiences to do that signals processing.
Yeah, and we'll touch on that a little later in the call as well. It's a very good point. Let's switch gears. You guys have obviously done a good job of penetrating some very interesting clients, and obviously without giving anything away, are there any sort of inferences that you can say? What are the sort of things you're seeing in the market that might help some of the callers today?
Well, we've had a focus around the Google Search Appliance, although we've always had a multidisciplinary approach to our implementation. And first and foremost, they're always, right, they're still kind of grappling with the notion that the GSA is going away. They don't understand it. They really don't understand the replacement technology, and they're entering this marketplace where now it's called an insight engine. And there was, I think, a slide on our last Coveo webinar where we talked about what a car radio looks like, from 2007 to 2017. I mean, they're practically driving the car now. They're talking to space. There's a lot of new features that are being taken advantage of in that form factor. Kind of going back to the people aren't really impressed with the fact that you can index their content and show them a list. When you start talking with them about the ability to reach additional content sources, use machine learning, use cloud processing, it's really in the context of where they're at. So a lot of them are using Salesforce. I mean, practically, it's an assumption now that most of our customers are using Salesforce. That's where they're spending their time. That's where they want to see search. And before it was fairly difficult to do that. And with some of the tool sets that you have, it solves that problem pretty easily. But there's certainly no shortage of expectations. They expect highly relevant results. They don't want to staff a team to tune relevancy. They expect reports and reporting on the effectiveness of the solution, and these are kind of universal. But I think that the biggest one we're dealing with the rest of this year is this tectonic shift that's occurring with out with the old and with the new.
Well, speaking of that, we talked about the Google Search Appliance. You talked about the GSA Cliff. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the first versions, we had a person here was being pushed, but the reality is that at the end of this year, there's no net new sales of the GSA, and so regardless of who you are, where you are, they will begin to shut down. The technology is licensed with the term license, and at the end of the term, it effectively shuts off. It bricks. So we've kind of had this slide. So this being 2017, we're continuing to offer sales. We're continuing to offer upgrades and such. But our message is really around you need to get ahead of the curve because there are thousands of customers just like you, and it's kind of overwhelming to the degree of the problems in our vertical space markets. It's like a Y2K for some of these customers.
Yeah. Well, excuse me, for those folks on the call, obviously a large part of why we're working together is to make this process to transition as seamless as possible. And maybe just to put in context, maybe why think of Coveo in this context. As we saw at the beginning of the presentation, we've got some very strong accolades from the industry analysts, both Gartner and Forrester concur. And part of that is really where we fit in is notion of bringing relevance to every place that you may interact, whether your audience is customers, whether they're partners, whether it's an internal use case for employees. And the way we do that, picking up on some of the points Michael made earlier, is about this equation, this combination of reaching into an ecosystem of disparate data systems, disparate information, structured and unstructured information across all sorts of places inside your company. Call that content, information that ultimately you want to be able to unify and make available to an audience. And we combine that with the context of what it is that they're looking to do. So if that's an internal scenario of somebody needing information at their fingertips for an enterprise search environment or a knowledge management system or an employee portal or whatever, fine. Equally, maybe it's integration with an online workflow, an app, a website, and a publicly facing browser-based experience, how are we fitting in and using the context of those interactions to, frankly, help further refine and make more relevant the results? And thirdly, combining that with the behavior of what other people have done. So, there's a wisdom of crowds, if you like, that comes from being able to analyze all of the search journeys, all of the data, all of the machine, history, if you like, and glean from that enough information to be able to start predicting what good looks like. Michael talked about the importance of knowing what your desired outcomes need to be. Well, how do you then enable a machine learning-based system to start tuning and identifying content and context that does the right behavior? And that's where the sum provides us with this notion of relevance, and relevance that can be driven at scale using the power of the systems. If we think of AI-powered Coveo, AI-powered search from Coveo, we really see that manifest in terms of, firstly, a very robust set of connectivity across all these disparate systems, whether they're cloud-based systems, on-premise environments, legacy databases, and ERP applications, and who knows what, a myriad of tools and API connectors that enable us to reach into those systems or have content pushed from those systems to a secure index. And then being able to, as I say, weave that into an in-app search journey. So using, for example, a series of either pre-built applications from Coveo or indeed a series of integration tools such as harnessing our user interface, JavaScript, open source tools to build in the kind of places where people are going to interact. And then, as I say, being able to understand and use the Coveo usage analytics to have Coveo glean what good looks like and provide, frankly, some really meaty dashboarding and metrics as to what's working, what's not, what are the most important search terms, where are the content gaps. And all of that effectively is what's driving, the data science under the hood through the machine learning capability that we've got. And, I guess, Michael, you've seen that in practice as you've made your recommendations to your customers.
And absolutely. I mean, it's kind of de facto for us, and not, we kind of don't think of it as being revolutionary, because it's just many things of what people are expecting. There's a search system, an insight engine. It's not really worthwhile unless it can get to the content that it needs to serve up as part of the service. You have to put it into context to the journey, the workflow, and it has to tune itself, and you need to know if you're affecting those outcomes.
Fair. And I mean, maybe for those folks that are less familiar with this stuff, here's just a couple of screenshots of a simple example to show this in practice. And this is a desensitized company, so we're not betraying any confidences here. But the way it manifests itself is this idea of being able to index a myriad of different systems. So whether those are CRM systems or an existing intranet that might be out there, or tapping into email repositories, forms, whatever they are, what are those different systems of record that need to be firstly connected to in order to glean that information, and then clearly being able to, more importantly, display back the most relevant information based on, for example, a particular query, giving people additional navigational capabilities to drill in and fine-tune what it is that they're looking to search in on, and perhaps more importantly, also identify for them other related content, search terms that might have been equally appropriate that other people have used, perhaps even picking up content from other places that would be relevant to this particular role. We see that our friend Jason Bart here is an engineer, and so maybe bugs would be important for engineers to know about that might not be relevant to other people. So you can see that the presentation of this information is not just about give me a list of results. It's give me stuff that's most relevant to me in the context of my role, in the context of what I'm doing. Provide me with additional recommendations and related supporting information that can help me get where I need to be. And then you can kind of take that, if we think from an internal use case point of view, for example, well, what about if there are other people in an organization who may be expert within my organization that, could point me to additional sources of information? It's not just the written content or the video clips or whatever that may have been indexed. Coveo is also able to kind of cross-correlate and identify the authorship of that content. And it's not just that someone might be prolific and has generated a lot of information. It's analyzing the data under the hood to say, yeah, the data that, Christian Doppler generated actually is being used by other people. Therefore, he is de facto an expert on this topic, in this case, noise canceling. John's our man, but here are some other people you may want to talk to as well. So the point is that all of this kind of correlation and recommendation extends well beyond, search as you used to know it. It is this notion of providing the most relevant information in context, both externally and internally, and even to the point of expertise. Perhaps just to, also put a stinger on this thing, since we were talking about the GSA, one of the things Coveo has done is put in place an offer that really means that folks that are currently, staring down the barrel of that, or not to mix metaphors, standing on the edge of that GSA cliff, there is up to 25% discount available for a Coveo subscription to replace that GSA subscription, and I'll make no bones about being bold about that. So, if that's something that can help you begin your migration process to move earlier, obviously we'd love to hear from you. There's some small print that, we can get into the weeds and the details for those that care after this call. So why don't we sum up and see what questions there are. So we covered quite a lot of ground. We talked about what an insight engine was, why it's relevant for your business externally and internally. We talked about some of the key considerations to bear in mind, the impact of, what's going on in the market and what people are expecting as they look forward. And then equally, just the reality of, the trade-offs of what folks on GSA are facing and what Coveo can potentially leap them forward to. So, Michael, do you have any questions that come through?
Yes, we have a couple here. I will read it out, and then we can go to it. So, first question is, what is your recommendation for those who want but have not measured or benchmarked case deflection? That's I think, and I'm going to take a little bit of a play on that, because many times, Mark, do you have any initial thoughts? And I can kind of dive into that.
Well, feel free, but I can certainly follow on. I've got some thoughts as well, whichever way.
Yeah, so when we speak to customers, I would say that there's sort of two camps. One is an organization who has very tight metrics and analytics to their processes, specifically into a call center or support desk. They know the open cases, the case resolution time, and down to minutes, et cetera. And then the other side is the group that doesn't have any metrics. And so there's sort of we can take two approaches to that. One is initially trying to establish some guidance or analytics based on what they currently have. It's usually very difficult, but because when we implement any analytics system, we always say capture more data than you think you're going to use, capture data points that you may or may not use, because you can never go backwards in time and re-implement those. So we're kind of left with what pieces they have there, and we kind of use a forensic approach to say, okay, well, here's what we see, and this is what we have there. And the other side is to take industry standard benchmarks and apply them. But the goal is to look at percentages of which cases stop coming to the desk as on the front end, and then reducing the time or increasing the threshold, the case per hour that a particular rep handles. I remember, and this was probably 15 years ago, it was a large bank on the West Coast was paying somewhere around $6 to $12 per email. They had figured out per email in response, and so you see as you banter through with the rep how that could be fairly costly. So they typically will have those type of metrics, and if we just can improve a few percentage points, it's usually just a stunning return on investment. Mark, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, one of the things that we see, and we're fortunate in that we've had a lot of high-tech customers who in themselves have also got very demanding end users who are pushing them for more self-service. They want to be able to find information themselves. They want it to be relevant, and they want it immediately. So they've been a pretty demanding sector within which to find our craft. And what we've been able to do for those IT-specific firms in particular was meet their needs very early in terms of measuring this stuff. And you're absolutely right, Michael. There's companies need to establish a baseline and continue to build from it. We within Coveo actually have a case deflection metric that gives people the opportunity to say, if I see this particular behavior exhibited, I can explicitly call that a deflection of a case. I'll give you an example. If a consumer electronics company, for example, has a form on their website to request help from customer support, i.e. you're going to initiate a case. But immediately adjacent to that form, there's a panel that is in real time dynamically updating itself with relevant content based on what the person might be typing into the form, and they stop and they click on some of that content instead, and they therefore did not click the submit button. They did not pass go. They did not collect $200. Instead, they've gone off to the content. We would call that a deflected case, and you can choose to measure that as an assumption, or you could choose to say, I'm only going to measure when people actually click the cancel button. But whatever it is you want to do it consistently, because that becomes a baseline. There are other folks that have perhaps less specific scenarios that might say, we regard anyone that, for example, comes to our site and finds information of themselves, clicks through to it, and consumes. We would call that something that otherwise would have come to the contact center. That's a pretty broad definition, but the point is, if that's the definition you want to use, be consistent with it. And we find best practices that companies tend to actually track certain different levels, and they benchline against each of these with sort of increasing specificity so that they can fine-tune the dials.
And I would also add that.
Yep.
I was just going to add that this is the base technology works in an omnichannel world. So again, where your context is where you can bring these things in. So if you have people monitoring Twitter, you can be looking at the tweet, you can be servicing up relevant articles, adding them in. If they're coming into the call center, if they're coming in through your customer community, it is a piece of technology that's going to surface up in a variety of places.
Yeah, that's a good point, just to build on that. And, one of the things we see, and the dynamic, talking of contact centers and case deflection and self-service and so on, one of the dynamics we've seen with a lot of customers is that, clearly all these things need to work together, because at the end of the day, it's still a customer, a consumer behind all this stuff, trying to just get something done. And so if they try to self-service, and for whatever reason that content doesn't exist, okay, well, at least we've got a content gap that shows up. That highlights what needs to be created and published. Let's say they come through to the contact center and talk to an agent, and the agent is able to solve that because they've found some information at their fingertips. Okay, that's good. But over time, what this does is you get to a point where a lot of the easy things have been taken off the table. No one phones in anymore to ask for a password reset. That stuff's all done online and automated. So the agent's dynamic is that they end up having to deal with more complex matters. They need access to more sophisticated information to show that, and they need it right now. And so then from a knowledge management point of view, how do you equip them to, for example, write up the answer that they solved for the customer, and self-publish that so that it too becomes available as fresh content for other people to now find either elsewhere in the contact center or indeed published in the self-service environment. So this notion of content continuing to become ever more readily available so that it's relevant for other people too, where the behavioral dynamics will pick up on it, that's so crucial.
It is, and that kind of segues us to a next point of any sample of user analytic metrics. As an example, how is it measured and managed? I kind of want to add to, recently we had a long discussion with someone who spends a lot of time on no results. And there's this notion that getting a search results page with no results was like evil and bad. And it's from our view, it's not. I mean, as you said, it identifies potentially a content gap. It also identifies a nomenclature gap. And when there's a content gap, it clearly identifies like search term or what the intent described was to something that you can fill out or create content and publish it versus the long tail of what people are doing. So in terms of metrics, there are usually searches per particular time frame, categorization of search, pagination, and there are these other ones that kind of build out from the specific use of the system. They're generally very, very tied to it. And then as Mark mentioned, there's this overlay which you tie into kind of the click stream. So a metric is, a self-defined metric is, did someone initiate a search and click out of the workflow, and then you record that as a successful case deflection. So there are many different standard and then other metrics above that. Mark, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think that what we see, and I think you've seen it too in your clients, is that people are using a number of different dashboards for different things, and yet the irony of it is that how do you try and present that information in ways that deliver insights to the people who need to actually do their jobs? So whether that is someone that's improving the veracity of search on a website. The insights, as you say, in terms of what content gaps may they have that they can inform their content production team to go fill. What terms are people landing to them on that they don't have an answer for, but that might be a hot SEO term to go optimize on. Those sort of insights are crucial and obviously come from it. Equally, if you think from an internal use case point of view, the same thing applies. If there are, in an organization of 12,000 staff, people are looking for, let me make it up, the drinking on Fridays policy, and there isn't one. Well, someone better write one. And, ironically, the person who may discover that gap is actually sitting looking at the analytics and can give that insight back to the HR team as to, what might be required. So this is really, providing the departments responsible for those areas with the insights behind the scenes, it fundamentally helps them do their jobs better.
Okay, good. We have a question. Is there a connector or one in the works for ServiceNow? I actually think that there's not one that's part of the published V2 platform, but I will take that as a follow-up and see what the roadmap is for there. It is something that we've actually worked on in the past as well, so might be something there.
Yeah, and I can pick up on that one as well. You're absolutely right, Michael. At the box, a ServiceNow bespoke connector we don't have. However, what we do have, And what, for example, I know you guys have touched on professional services teams work with as well, is we've actually developed, let's call it a push API, and it's a series of tools that enables, the ability to have information sent to the Coveo cloud from a system that we don't have a native connector for. So the idea being that instead of, for example, saying, all right, here's this quick drag and drop point and click coupler to ServiceNow, well, instead, here's an API that can be set up to receive an export from ServiceNow, and that can be done on a batch basis from a secure area, pushed up through, an open firewall, however stuff is actually structured. And so we see a lot of organizations that may have something that we don't have a native connector to, still being able to effectively push content to us, utilizing, custom development around that push API.
Kind of 2 points I'll make to that is one, we actually won an award from Google on developing a series of connectors, and we're working with your platform team as well to kind of share some insight and get some gap coverages, but we can always develop a custom connector as well, either using the push API, etc. But it kind of goes into another one of our philosophies is we always can get the content in there. That's generally not the problem. It's a matter of level of effort. But the question comes is, what content do you want and why? Going back to the journeys and the user personas, we would come on site and people would say, well, we need the P drive index. I'm like, well, I don't know what that means. Like, well, there's this P:drive. Can you index it? And you'd find out that it was some sort of archive project thing. And we would be staunchly against that because the GSA was licensed per document. And so we're like, well, one, this is going to eat up your doc count. And it's the same is true if it's Salesforce data, if it's box content. And we're not really in that realm anymore, but you can return highly relevant, useless content. And so kind of going through a requirements definition and mapping out those journeys and outcomes, we sort of sometimes will put blinders on the scope of what the data is that we're looking at so that it allows the engine to work even that much better.
Right.
One more question. It says, for those moving from GSA, what tips can you provide for building a business case to make that shift? I can handle this one. Kind of what we start off with is the fact that you kind of don't need to make a business case because it's going to turn off. So I mean that's kind of like we start off with a little chuckle on that point because there is a de facto compelling event that has been placed in. Last year we had this summary of kind of what to think about when you think about the GSA, and it's kind of boiled down to three things. Is one, go back to looking at why you purchased the GSA. What was it that interests you? What was it that you were trying to solve? And then step two is, did it solve that? Were your goals met, or what weren't being met? Some people were very delighted. So I mean, I've deployed 250 GSA's worked with thousands of customers on our products and such, but the people would fall into different realms where they were very satisfied or very dissatisfied. You want to identify those gaps and then look at a replacement technology for replatforming. We find that a lot of customers like the fact that they like Coveo because its form factor, it has It's building up a reputation similar to Google. So as Google's fading, newcomers are kind of coming up to the top of the mountain. So some people say like, we couldn't implement GSA, so we're going to use Elasticsearch, and I kind of like I say like I don't have enough eyes to roll. Like this is a ready-to-run solution, and you had difficulty implementing it organizationally. Why do you think it's going to be easier with a framework approach? And Elastic's great. It's good technology. We talk about it in other senses, but when you're talking about intent and outcomes, Coveo's ready to run. It has it's a pretty fast deployment similarly to the GSA. So in terms of the business case, is you're looking for what are the user personas, what are you attempting to solve, what are the outcomes, developing the costing model around that is like the first point to developing the ROI and the business justification for purchasing. But as we joke, there's it's either do something or it's going to turn off. Mark, you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The other thing perhaps is that clearly for folks for whom those requirements when they originally wrote them maybe a couple of years back, this is an opportunity clearly to also look forward. This isn't just about, as you said, replacing like for like. It is about moving forward and replatforming. So, taking advantage of all the additional capabilities that that can be brought to bear is also worth bearing in mind.
Yeah, we definitely stress that you follow us on any of our feeds. It's not an OEM replacement. It's generally our motto. I think that is it for question. I do have one other point. So with regards to taking advantage of that GSA offer, you do need to go through MC+A so we can make sure that we get the opportunity registered with Coveo and get you full advantage of taking that discount. So we'll be following up with, there'll be a series of follow-ups with the link to download, any questions, but feel free to, and we've got it up there, feel free to reach out to me or contact us through our web form if you have interest in that offer.
Absolutely right. Well, Michael, it's been a pleasure, and it sounds like we had a lot of interaction with folks via the questions as well. I just want to thank you very much for being the co-host on this, and any final words?
Well, Mark, I'm going to be looking to meet you in San Francisco at Insight. There are still some tickets available. If anyone wants to join us, they should reach out to me. So we have some tickets that we're offering up to some of our customers who are in the region. So I'll be looking forward to bumping into you in San Francisco in a couple of weeks.
Excellent. Take care. And thanks, everybody, for your attention on the call today. Much appreciated.